All right. We're going to continue from where we stopped last time. We talked about objects, how you can create objects, how you can access data from objects, and how you can modify some of the items that we have on the object there. There is still a lot to be done on the object, but we need to talk about other basic constructs that you need to know about before we start manipulating the content on the page. And today we are going to be talking about functions in JavaScript. And when you're talking about functions, functions are reusable blocks of code that you can call again and again anytime you need that same code. So what do we to functions? Functions are reusable block of code that come together to achieve a particular, aims there or a particular result. So when you're talking about functions, so you have bunch of code that you want to put together in a particular block where you are going to be using a name to represent. And anytime you need that same functionality there, you can call it back without you defining or without it defining, giving it another definition or without you telling this is that this is what you want to do by doing copy and paste there like that. So a function, the basic definition about it is that functions are reusable block of code that comes together to achieve a specific goal there or results. Um, and in JavaScript, we have two types of functions. So in JavaScript, we have two type of functions. We have the built-in functions and we have the user-defined functions. So when you're talking about the built-in, it means it's already there in JavaScript. Anytime you need them, just call it and it's going to work there like that. And we'll be talking about all those built-in one later on. But first, we need to talk about how you can create your own function, which is what we call the user-defined function. So when you're working later on, you are dealing with some content on the page, you see that this stuff that you want to do, you need to do that same thing in different places on the page. So instead of you doing copy and paste with your code, what you can do there is to create a function that you can now call in those places that needs to give you the same result. But how do you create the function? So I will be showing you how you are going to be creating a function and at the same time how to use a function. And once you know how to create a function and know how to use it, then there won't be any problem with you using the built-in one or the one that you are going to be creating yourself later on. I hope you are still here. Okay, all right. So functions again are reusable blocks of code
Hello, sir.
to achieve a specific goal. So functions are a reusable block of code that comes together to achieve a particular goal there like that. For example, you can create a function that will be changing the background of the text that you click on. So if I click on this text, it's going to change the background to red. If I click on this one here, it's still going to change the background to red and so forth like that, depending on what you want to do. But you can actually create a function that will be doing this thing for you. And anytime you call that function, it's going to perform that same action for you anytime you call it. But don't forget, I said we have two types of function there when you want to categorize them. So we have two types. So we have the built-in functions. The built-in one means that it's already baking into JavaScript. You don't need to create them. Your own is just to use. So anytime you need them, just call them and they are going to perform the action they are meant to do for you there. But for the one that is done in JavaScript, you have to create it yourself because a lot of the time you need to create a function that is going to do what you're expecting it to carry out there. And how do you do this one? You need to use the user define. And what if I do the user define? You are creating the function yourself, not that it's already in JavaScript. So you have to tell JavaScript, okay, this function is not part of what has been given to you or what has been baked into you. So I want to create my own. And anytime I call this function, this is what I want the function to do. And that's where this part comes in there, which is how you can create a function. Because you need to know how to create a function before you can start calling the function. So when you are creating your own function, there are different methods that you can use to create a function, but here I'll be talking about these two methods that are kind of what you'll be using there day in day out. And the first one is by using this function keyword, which I'm going to show you how it looks like. And at the same time, you can create a function using this other method here, which is known as this arrow function. So these are the two ways, or these are the two major ways of creating functions are there, but you are going to be seeing other methods too later on. But these are the major methods or that you can use to create your function. So we have this function keyword, and at the same time we have this arrow function there. And how do you create a function using the function keyword? So to create a function, this is how it's going to be here. So this function here is what we call, this is what we call keyword, which is something I mentioned before. When you're talking about keyword, these are registered word in JavaScript. And what I mean by registered word, it means all these words, you can't use them for something else. They have meaning to JavaScript. And anytime you type them, they are going to perform a specific task. And that task, you cannot change it to another thing. And this function here is one of them. And we've seen other one like the let that we are using, like the if, and so forth like that we have been using since. So like const, the functions, this in there, the let, and a lot of other things that are keyword in JavaScript. So keyword are registered word in JavaScript. So which means this word, it has a specific meaning to JavaScript. And whatever that specific meaning, that's the only thing it's going to carry out. You can't change it to do another thing here. And function here is one of that special word that we have in JavaScript. And what do we use this function for? We use it to create a function that you can use in different places in your program later on there. Don't forget, functions are just reusable block of code. And how do you bundle all this code together into a block? You are going to be creating the function. And in order for you to create a function, you are going to be using this keyword here, which is this function. Then in front of it, you are going to create the name. So this naming stuff now will come from you, but this function here is a keyword. It must always be like this. You can't change it to another thing, or you can't use any other thing to represent it. But when you're talking about the function name, then that one, it's all going to be depending on the name that you want to use there, like that. For example, here I have this function which is known as print age. So when you are creating a function, you are going to start with this function keyword, followed by space, and followed by the name of the function. And this name is very important because this is what you are going to be using later on to call the function. And what I mean by calling function, we get to that part when we are done with defining or creating our function there. So before you can use any function that is being created by you there, that you're going to be creating later on, you need to let JavaScript know that, okay, this function here, this is the name of it, and this is the action that is going to be carried out later on. So this function, this is what it's going to do, and these are the stuff that is going to return back to me. So you need to let JavaScript to know about everything. And you doing that is what we refer to as a function definition. So what we are doing here is that we are defining our function. And when you are defining function, you need to start with this function keyword. That one, if you are using this first method, using the function keyword. So you need to start with this function keyword. Then after the function keyword, so the first thing is function keyword. Then after this function keyword, the next thing that you need to mention is the name of the function, because this is what you are going to be using later on to call it. And after you supply the name of the function, the next thing you are going to pass into it is the bracket that we have there. And this is how JavaScript is going to know that this thing is a function, is not a variable that we've talked about before. So because if you look at it, it's using the same name as the way you do with your variable. The difference is that we are starting this one with function, and we have this bracket in front of the naming here like this. So when you're dealing with a function, or when you want to create a function, or when you want to define a function, you need to start with this function keyword, followed by the name of the function that you are going to be creating by yourself, but make sure that the naming is following the rules of a variable there. So which means there you can't have space in the naming of your variable, in the naming of your function here, just like the way we have it in the variable there. So when you're creating a variable, you can't have space. You can't have any legal character there. Here too, when you are creating a function, the name of this your function needs to follow a valid variable name. But what is the difference between function and variable? Variable hold value, while functions hold a bunch of codes together that you can reuse in different places. Don't forget your variable too is something that you can reuse, but variable only hold values, while functions hold codes together. So they are different. When you're talking about value, you are just talking about one item. But when you're talking about function, function is going to be a block of codes where you can do a lot of things, and that your function you can call it anywhere that you need it, and it's going to carry out that same operation again and again and again there, depending on the number of time that you call that function. But the major thing here is that you need to define the function first. So, and how do you define a function? You start with the function keyword, which is what I have here. So you start with the function keyword if you are using this first method. Then after the function keyword, you are going to have the name of the function, and this name here will be coming from you. And you should always use a descriptive name based on what you are trying to use that function for. And as you can see here, I have a function, and this function is named print age because of the action that I want to use this function for. So since it's going to print out a age, that's the reason why I'm calling this function print age. But you can call it anything that you want. So if you want to create a function, once again, you start with the function keyword. So let me create another one down here. So we're going to start with the function keyword. Then after the function keyword, you have space. Then from there, you are going to have the name of the function that you want to do. For example here, login user. So I'm calling this my function login user. And after this function name, you are going to have the brackets. And after the bracket, you are going to have this curly brace, because inside the curly brace, this is where you are going to put all the code that this your function is going to carry out, or the action that the function is going to perform are there. And that's what I call this statement here. So when you are creating a function, start with the name, start with the function keyword, followed by the name of the function. After the name, you are going to have the brackets here. And after the bracket, you are going to have the curly brace. And inside the curly brace, you are going to have the statement, which are the actions that you want this your particular functions to carry out there. So this is a function here, which is this print age. And what is the action? The action here is just to console log out this particular stuff that we have inside this function here. So if I want this one to do something, so I just need to type whatever it's going to do. So for example here, the first thing this one is going to do is login user. And after they carry out this operation, again is going to print out this the username is admin like this. So this is a function, and this function here, I'm talking to JavaScript. Okay, I want to have a function, and this function is going to be using this name, and the name is login user. But anytime this function is called later on, these are the actions that I want the function to perform. And what are the actions here? It's going to console log out the login user, and at the same time, it's going to console log out the username is admin. And as you can see, we have a bunch of code under this function here. But this code are only going to be executed here if and only if you call this your function. What you are actually doing right now, we are not calling the function, we are only creating or defining the function. So we are talking to JavaScript that this is what this thing is going to do, but right now we are not calling it yet. So if I save it, you are not going to see anything coming out in the console, because the only thing we are doing here is just to define the function. We are not calling it yet. So the first thing you need to do is to define your function, and once you define your function, then you can call it anytime that you need it. But the only thing we are doing here is defining the function. We are not calling it. So before you can call your function, you need to let JavaScript to know about that function first. That's what we call functional the function definition, and that's what we are doing on this line 388 to this line 395, because we have two functions here. The first one is known as this print age. The second one is known as this login user. And anytime you need to perform this action again, you can call the function. But you are going to see how to call the function when we get down to this calling or using a function. But before you can call the function, you need to define what that function or the action that the function is going to carry out there like that. But this is not the when you want to work with function, you need to define it. And when you want to define a function, you can use this function keyword, which is what we did here. But apart from using this function keyword, we can define our function using this method again, which is known as this arrow function. So we have the function keyword to define our function, and at the same time, we can use this arrow function to define our function there. So I'm going to comment out this one so that we can focus on the second one here too. So this is how to create a function using arrow. And what is the arrow there? Where is the name coming from? Where is the name arrow coming from? It's coming from what is here. So this is the arrow here. This is where the name is coming from, because this thing looks like arrow, and that's why the name of this thing is named as arrow. So and how do you create arrow function? So to create arrow function, look at the way this one is so compared to what we had before. So when you want to create arrow function, you are going to start with const. There you can use let too, but here we are going to be using const because the name is not going to be changing. And you know that anything that is not going to be changing there, you should always start with const. But if you know that it's going to change later on, then you can use let. But since this is a function and the name of our function is not going to be changing at all, whatever naming you are using here, that's what we're going to be using to call that function later on. And that's why this one that we're using const here. So after the const, just like the way you have this function keyword at the top here, the next thing you are going to have there is the name of the function that you want to use. So just like the way we have the login user here, you can have the same thing here. But now we are defining this function using another method. And the method we are using right now is known as arrow function. And what is this arrow? This is the major thing that is here. So you are creating like a variable here. So this function name is like a variable, but we are now assigning it to this particular stuff that I have in front of it here. And this thing that you are seeing here is what we refer to as arrow. Right now, you look at the stuff is joined together, but that's not the way it used to be. Oh. You know that my own font has been changed. So the arrow function is this. This is what we call arrow function. Can you see? The browser is showing F. And anytime it's showing F for you, F means function. So anytime you have something like this, we call it arrow function. But this arrow function, you cannot give it a name. Any arrow function, you can't give them name. But you know when you want to call your function or when you want to use your function later on, you need to call them through the name. And that's the reason why we are assigning it to this variable function name. So we are creating a variable, but the value of this variable is a function. And this function we are connecting to here is what we call arrow function. And how do you create arrow function? So to create arrow function, you are going to start with the bracket there, open and closing parentheses there. And after that, you are going to have this equal sign, then followed by the greater than symbol. So the two of them combined together, that's what is showing like this on my VS Code. This is what I'm typing, but this is what is showing on my VS Code because of the font that I'm using. But this is what you are going to be typing there. So you are going to start with the brackets that you want. So yeah, let me clean everything. So start with the bracket, close the bracket. Then after this one, you are going to have the equal sign. And after the equal sign, you have the greater than symbol. So, and after this one, you're going to have the curly brace. And inside the curly brace, that's where you're going to perform whatever stuff you want to run with this function here. And that's what I call statement. So whatever you be putting inside this your curly brace here is going to be the statement or the actions that you want your function to carry out there. Hello? I hope you are still here. All right, so I think I have to go back a little bit, but I have already explained a lot for the past 15 minutes there like that. So I said today we're
Wow.
talking about functions. And what is functions? Functions are reusable block of code there, so that you can use again and again in different places there. For example, yes, I said, imagine we have a logic or we have a code that we want to do here. We want to change the color. Any button that you click on is going to change, or any text that you click on is going to change the color of that text to red. But this functionality here now, assuming I want to do it on different text on the screen. It means I have to be doing copy and paste to each one of the texts that I want this functionality to worked on there like that. But instead of you doing that, you can create a function that is going to do this magic for you. And anytime you call the function, it's going to perform the action again and again anywhere you need that function. So functions are reusable block of code. You have a bunch of code that you put together. That's what we call block. A block just means like you have all this code, you put them together in a particular name, and anytime you need those functionality, you can now recall that functions later on there. So a function, the basic definition about it is that a function are reusable block of code that you can reuse in your, just like the way the name is there. So they are reusable blocks of code. So you have a bunch of code that we want to run again and again. So instead of you doing copy and paste for this code, what you can do is that you can put all this code under a specific name, and anytime you need that particular logic or particular functionality, you just call the name where you put all those code there like that, and that's what we refer to as functions. So functions are reusable block of code. I hope you are here and everything is clear. Hello, hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir, I can hear you, sir. I can hear you.
Okay, functions are reusable block of code.
Yes, sir.
And what we refer to as block of code, you are going to be seeing all the same by the time we started creating a function there. And when you want to create a function, we have two ways of creating a function. So we have this function keyword, and at the same time, we have this arrow function. So we have this function keyword. So when you want to create a function, you can use this function keyword to create a function, or you can use this arrow function to create the function. These are the two major ways of creating a function. Because before you can create a function, before you can use a function, you need to create that function. So if the function is coming from you, you have to let JavaScript to know about that function, and that's what we call function definition. So you need to define the function, and when you're defining the function, you need to give it the name of the function and what that function is going to do. But how do you do all this thing? That's where we have these two methods that you can use to create your function. So you can use this function keyword, or you can use this arrow function. So I'm going to go back because I've already explained this first method, and again this second method too. Before this thing was like it was not going again. So I need to go back up and start everything again. All right, so how do you create a function? I said we have this function keyword. So to create a function or to define a function, both of them are the same thing. So when you're asked to define a function or when you're asked to create a function, they are telling you to do the same thing there. So you can create your function or you can define your function. And how do you define or how do you create your function? So to create a function using this function keyword, you need to start with this function, followed by space, and followed by the name of the function. And what is this name here? This is what we are going to be using later on to recall or to call back this function to come and carry out the operation that you want it to do for you there. So to create a function using this function keyword, you are going to start with this function, followed by space, and followed by the name of your function. After that, it's going to be followed by this bracket, and after the bracket, you are going to have the curly brace. And inside the curly brace, this is where you now put all the actions that all the statement that you want your function to carry out for you anytime you call the function. So when you are creating a function using this method, you are going to start with this keyword. After the keyword, you are going to have a space, and after the space, you are going to have the name of the function. And inside this function here, inside the curly brace, you are going to give it all the statements, which is what we call actions, because statements are just action. Whatever you want this function to do, you are going to put everything inside the curly brace there like that. For example, now this is a function here that I'm calling print age. So when you are creating a function or when you want to use the function, you need to allow JavaScript to know about the function first. And that's what we are doing here. So we are telling JavaScript that JavaScript, we want to have a function that we'll be using later on. The name of it is this print age. And anytime this print age is called, this is the action that we want it to carry out for us. So anytime you are calling this function, it will always print out my age is 2. My age is 2. No matter the number of times you call this print age, it will always print out this particular text on the console there. So when you are creating a function, using this first method here by using the function keyword, you are going to start with this function followed by space, then followed by the name. And whatever name you want to use for your function is going to come from you, but just make sure that the name is not having space, is not having any legal character. It's just like the way you normally create your variable. So the way you'll be creating variable, that same way you'll be creating the name of the function. The difference between them is that variable is holding value, while function is holding statement or block of code. So you can't put block of code in a variable. The only thing you can put there is just a value. So is it that you put string value, or you put boolean value, or you put object, and so forth like that. But when you need to combine a lot of things together and you need to do this thing again and again, then you are going to be using function. And in order for you to create a function, you are going to start with this function keyword, followed by space, and followed by the name of the function. You will be the one that will be creating the name here. And the name that you are going to be using here, you have to use a valid name that JavaScript is expecting for you. And whatever name you are using, that's what you'll be using to call, whatever name you are using here, that's what you are going to be calling later on to carry out the operation that this function needs to do there. And how do you give this function what it needs to do? So once you define the function, once you create the function here inside the curly brace, you are going to pass all the action that it needs to carry out. And again, too, I have this another function which is called login user. So this first one is known as print age. When you want to call it later on, this is the name you are going to use. Again, this is another function on its own, and the name of this one is login user. And anytime this function is called, this is the action that the function is going to carry out there. So what is it going to do? Once this function is called, it will print out this login user to the console, and at the same time, it will print the username is admin to the console there. And if I save this in, nothing is going to happen yet because we are only defining the function. We are not calling the function. There are two things when you are working with function. When you are working with the function that you created by yourself there, you have to define it, which is what we did here. And after you've defined a function, you need to call it. But how do you call a function? We're going to get to that when we get to this particular part here. But before we get to the calling of our function or using our function, we need to see other ways of defining function, because this is not the only way that you can define your function. You can use this arrow function too. So, and what is arrow function here? This is another method that you can use to create or to define a function. And when you want to create a function using arrow function there, this is the method, this is a structure that you are going to be using when you are creating a function that follows this arrow pattern. So what you see, what I see here, this is not the way it is. So it's because don't forget, I've changed the font of my VS Code, and the way it's going to display some symbol here will be different from the normal symbol there. And what do we refer to as arrow here? The arrow is just this entire box here. So the arrow is just this entire items here. So this is what we call arrow here. This is where the name is coming from. So to create arrow function, here is just by using this bracket. So to create arrow function, you are going to start with this bracket here. After the bracket, you are going to have this equal sign, and after the equal sign, you are going to have the greater than symbol. And from there, you are going to have this your curly brace, because that's what is going to complete the function. And as you can see, the browser is showing F here. And what does this F mean? It means that this entire stuff here is a function. Just like the way you can create a function using this one here. So this is a function on its own. So this is how you can create this one using the function keyword like that, like this. And instead of you using function keyword, another way of defining a function is by using this arrow. And what is arrow? To create arrow function there, you need to start with this bracket, close the bracket. After the bracket, you're going to have this uh symbol, which is the equal symbol there. Then after that one, you are going to have the greater than symbol. And after this one too, you are going to have the curly brace. And this entire stuff here is what we refer to as arrow function. But if you look at it, the arrow function did not have name. You can't give arrow function a name. It's not like the normal function that we have up here. When you are dealing with a function keyword, after the function keyword, you are going to give it a name. And if you don't give it a name, it's going to complain. So this one, when you are working with it, you always give it a name. So if you type function, the next thing you need to pass there is the name of the function. So here now, the name of my function is this f. But when you are dealing with arrow function, this one doesn't accept any name from you. You can't give it any name. Since you cannot give it any name, what we can do is now to assign it a variable. And that's the reason why we have this line here. So when you want to work with arrow function, you are always going to assign it to a variable so that you can call this arrow later on this function with this particular name that we have on this line 398. So when you are creating a function using arrow function, the first thing you are going to do is to start with const, because the name of your function will not be changing later on. It's still going to be the same thing. Like whatever value that you are using here is still going to be the same thing. So it's not going to change. So that's what I'm starting it with const, but you can use let, just as if you are creating your normal variable there, like that. And the next thing that follows is the name of the function, because this name is very important. If you don't give it a name, there's no way you are going to call or use your function later on. So any function that you want to reuse there, you need to give it a name. But that name is what you are going to be using to call the function to carry out that operation. And here, since arrow doesn't have any name attached to it, so you need to assign it to a variable. And whatever variable you assign it to, that's what you now be using to call the function later on. So to create a function using arrow function, again, what you are going to do, start with const, followed by the name that you want to use to represent that your function. Then after the assignment operator here, you are going to create the arrow function. And what's the arrow function? That's what I have here on this my console here. So this arrow, this is what we call the arrow function. This entire stuff here is arrow function. But please don't forget, these two stuff that are joined together here, that's not the way it's going to be from your own side. This is how it's going to look like, because the combination of two symbols. But because I've changed the fonts of my VS Code, that's why it's looking like this. It's not going to look like this from your own side. This is how it's going to look like when you are typing it from your own VS Code here, because you don't have the same font that I have on my system, or the font I'm using for my VS Code is not the same thing that you're using there. So on your own VS Code, this is how the arrow is going to look like. So it's not going to look like my own that is pointing like a normal arrow that you know are there. But this is how it's going to be, but it's still the same thing that is going on there. So arrow function is a combination of all these items that you are seeing here like this. This is what we call arrow function. But this arrow function doesn't have name. You can't give it a name. So since you cannot give it a name, then we are now assigning it to a variable. And anytime we need this function, we just call the variable there like that to give us or to carry out the operation that this function is going to do like that. And what are the operations here? Is whatever you are passing in as the statement. So that's the action that this your function is going to carry out. For example, here now, I have this same print age that we have at the top here. So look at it. The print age that we have here, we are using the function to define it. We're using the function keyword to define it. But down here, we are using arrow to do the same thing. So look at the two of them. So the one we have up here is what we refer to as the default one, which is using the function keyword. So the one we have at the top here, we are using the function keyword to define the function. And the one we have down here, we are using the arrow function to define it. So this one, we're using the arrow. And what is the arrow here? This is the arrow here. So and inside this arrow, we are passing the action that this function is going to carry out. And once you call this function there, then it's going to console log out this my age from arrow is 3. But if you call this one, it's going to give you my age is 2. But you cannot have the two of them together. The name have to be different because you can't have two functions having the same name right now. So it's going to complain. So I'm going to disable one anytime I need to use any one of them there. But when you are creating a function, you can do it in this way, which is the one we have at the top here. or you can use the method down here, which is the arrow function. So any one of them can be used, but you can't use both of them together with the same name. You can use both of them, but it has to be a separate name. So if this first one is print age 1, then this one down here can be print age 2 or print age or any name that you want to use, but the name have to be different. But you can use any of these two methods to define your function there. So this is one way by using the function keyword, and this is another way down here by using the arrow function. And what is the arrow? Because this thing is very important. What is the arrow here? The arrow is this entire stuff that you're seeing here, which is what I have on this my console log here on the browser. So the entire stuff here is the arrow, and this arrow, you cannot give it a name. And since you cannot give it a name, then you need to assign it to a variable, and the name of this variable is what you now be using it to call it later on. Don't forget, variable are just name that you're using to represent a value, and anytime you call a variable, it's going to give you whatever value that you assign to it, and that's what we are doing here. So we are assigning this arrow function to this variable, so that anytime we call this variable later on, it's going to perform the action that we have inside this arrow function here. So we have two ways of creating a function: using function keyword or using the arrow function here. Hello, hope you are here.
I'm with you, sir.
Okay. I can hear you now. I guess maybe there's a lag in the
Yes, sir.
network there, like that, but I can hear you now. So we have two ways of defining a function. So after you define your function, the next thing we need to do is to call our function. And what do we refer to as calling function? This is where you can now talk to JavaScript to carry out the operation that you want that your function to do. Because anytime you define a function, JavaScript is not going to call it. It's just going to check, okay, the name of the function is print age, okay. The function is going to console log my age is from arrow, okay. That's the only thing the JavaScript will do with this function. It will only check the function, and it will note that this function, you can use it later on. But how do we now use the function? Because right now I cannot see anything from my console log here. We want this thing to print out my age from arrow is 3, but right now nothing is coming out. Why? Because we've not really called the function. We only define the function. There are two things when you are working in the function that you always do there, like that. If it is function that is coming from you, you always define it first by talking to JavaScript that this function, this is the name of it, and this is the operation is going to carry out. And once you define the function, the next thing is to call the function or start using the function. And when you want to use the function, this is how to call or use a function. So to call a function, you are going to call it name, and that's why I said the name are very important, because whatever naming you are using for your function, that's what you'll be using to call it later on to carry out that action. So if you want to call this print age now, what we have to do is to mention that name, then followed by this bracket. Please, you don't just call only the name. If you do it like this, you are dealing with variable, and it's not going to give you what you're expecting. So in order for the function to be called to carry out its action there, you need to pass this bracket in front of it, and this is what we call calling or using a function. So here we are talking to JavaScript that on this line 410, we want you to call this function and carry out all the operation that we pass into it when we are defining that function. So to call a function, you mention the name of the function, then followed by the bracket here. Please, the bracket is very important, because if it is not there, it will not call the function. It will only give you the name of the function. If you need to call the function, you need to pass these two brackets, because this is the difference between variable and function here. If you just leave it like this, you are just calling it as a variable. But if you do it like this, then you are talking to JavaScript to perform the action that you pass into this function when you are defining it. And if I save it now, you see that this thing is going to print out the action that we pass into that function. As you can see, look at where we call the function. We call the function on line 410. But by the time the thing come outside, it said the operation is happening on line 404. As you can see, the operation is actually happening on line 404. But we actually call the function on line 410. So the time you call the function, what is going to happen is that JavaScript will look for this function where you define it, and it will go to where you define the function. And once you see that function, then it will start carrying out all the operation that you have inside it. So that's the reason why you need to define your function first before you start calling the function. So when you define a function, the next thing is to call the function. And when you call the function, the next thing JavaScript will do is that it will start looking for where this function is coming from. Oh, it will get here. It will now see that this your function is defined here. And since the function is defined here, it will enter inside the curly brace and it will perform all the statements that you put inside it. And that's the reason why you see that this thing is telling us that it's coming from line 404. Even though it was called on line 10, but it's carrying out the operation that is on line 404 here, because whatever the definition that you give to your function, that's what is going to perform anytime you call a function. And how do you call a function? Type the name of the function, then follow by the bracket, which is the parenthesis that is here, and JavaScript will start looking for the function where you define it. And once you find that function, it's going to carry out whatever stuff that you have inside that function. And if you call a function that is not defined, for example here now, if I call this print age 1, we did not define any function as print age 1, and JavaScript does not have any function known as this one, because when we started this thing, I mentioned that we have two categories of our function. We have the built-in function and we have the user-defined function. So when you're talking about the built-in function, this one, they're already there in JavaScript. Just call them and they will work. You don't need to define them. They're already there. They have been defined for you. Your own is just to call them. They are known as built-in function. But the one we are working with right now is known as a user-defined, because you are the one creating the function. And anytime you mention any name of the function that is not inside a built-in, that means that function is user-defined, and it will look for where that function is coming from. So because you need to know the definition of the function so that you can carry out all those operations that you pass into the definition. But right now, we don't have anything like print age 1. So if I save it here, you see that this thing is going to complain, because it will look for where there is age 1. There is nothing like age 1 here. And since there is nothing like age 1, then there is no way it is going to print out anything. But the error is not showing. Why is the error is not showing? Is because I've hide my error there. So let me bring out the error back. So look at it. The error is hidden. So if I activate the error level back, you see that can you see what is that showing now? It's saying that it doesn't know where this print age 1 is coming from. As you can see, reference error. Print age 1 is not defined because we've not really defined this function before we start using it. You can't just start using any function anyhow like that. You need to define it first, which is what we did here. Then after we define the function, then you can now call it anytime you need it. And you can call it more than one time, but that's the major thing, or that's one of the reasons why we are using function. We can reuse it. So functions are reusable block of code. So which means if I want to do this thing again and again, I can just call the name of the function and it's going to carry out all this action every time that you call. As you can see, this is the first call, this is the second call, the third one, fourth one, and so forth like that, depending on the number of time you call the function. And this is one of the advantage of the using function here, because you want to do some of this operation in different places. So instead of you doing copy and paste, what you can do is that put everything under a function, and anytime you need that particular functionality, what you just do is that you call the function. And how do you call the function? The name of the function, then followed by the parentheses, that is going to call the function to carry out its operation there like that. So to work with function, you need to create that function first. And how do you create a function? You can create a function using the function keyword, or you can use the arrow function. And after you've already defined your function, the next thing you do is to call the function there like that. And how do you call the function? You start with the function name, then followed by this parentheses or the brackets that you are seeing here. And this one now is going to look for where this function is coming from, and it's going to perform whatever that is inside it. But if you call a function that JavaScript doesn't know about, you are going to get error, because it will be looking for this name. And since there is nothing like function name, as you can see, it said reference error. Function name is not defined because we did not define a function for this particular one anywhere like that. To make this thing to go in that way like that. So this is how you can create and call a function. I'm coming. Let me continue. So you can create a function and you can call a function. Let me show you some of the built-in functions that that we can work with. For example, here now I have a variable name, and it's going to be this uh, Abdul Rakib, like this. So in JavaScript, we have some built-in function that you can use here, like that. Like you don't even need to create them; they are inside JavaScript directly. For example, if I use this name and if I use dots, you see that there is a lot of things here. Like some of them they are functions, while some of them they are this in the property on this object. Don't forget we talked about object last time. Anytime you use dots, don't forget what you are trying to do. You are trying to access the property of the object. And one of the stuff here is this car art here. Can you see what it's showing? It's showing F. Anytime JavaScript is showing this F, what it means is that it's a function. And don't forget, anytime you want to call a function, what do we do? Anytime we want to call a function, assuming I want to call this function now, what I need to call this one is not complete yet. I'm not calling the function right now. So how do I call the function? So what do I need to do in order for this thing to be called? What did I need to do in order for this function to be called? This is a function that is defined on a string. So how do I call it? How do I make it to be a function that is called, not just getting the name of the function? So what do I need to do in order for you to call a function? What do I need to do in order for this function to be called? So what is missing here in order for this function to
I
be
don't understand this.
this is it here. This is it. This car here, this child art is a function we can call. But we are not the one that created this function. It's part of the built-in function that the JavaScript is giving us. Use it on your string. But right now, this is not the way to call the function. This is not the way to call this function. I mentioned that when you want to call a function, there's something you need to do. So what do we need to do here now to make this function callable? So what do we need to do to make sure that this function here is being called properly? But this thing is not being called properly right now.
You add const to it.
Nah. So, and that's the reason why I want to use this sample, because you need to understand this thing before I can move into the next one. All these function with parameter. When you want to not listen, I said call the function. You need to know the difference between you are creating a function and you are calling a function. They are two different stuff. Calling is different from defining a function. And that one you have to do is it. Let me go back again. So that means this thing that I explained, you are not following me. When I said when you want to create a function, we
I'm
have two
following
ways,
you.
we have two ways of creating a function. We have two ways of creating a function. One way is by using this function keyword. Another way is using this arrow function. So when you want to use function keyword to create your function, you are going to have it in this pattern here, where you are going to be having the function followed by the function name. Then inside the curly brace, you are going to have all the action that you want this function to carry out for you. This is how to create a function when you are using this method. Another method here is by using this arrow function, and that's where I mentioned the const. Is when you are creating the function that the const will comes in when you are using this arrow method. We have two methods. We have this method of a function keyword, which you are going to be starting with this function, then followed by the name. And this other method here is by using the const, and here you are going to have the name of the function, just like the way you have it up here. But the difference between this function keyword and the arrow is that for the function keyword, you are starting with this function, and for the arrow, you are starting with const. And in front of the name, you are going to have the actual arrow here, which is something I explained that the way this arrow is displaying right now, that's not the same way it is going to show on your own screen. When you are dealing with the arrow there, this is how it's going to be. So this is the arrow function. And as you can see, the way this arrow is displaying here is quite different from the way it's showing on my VS Code. So the two of them are revert to the same thing. But because I'm using a particular font, that's why it's looking like this. But this stuff is just the same thing as what is showing on the screen. So when you want to create a function, you can either use this method here to create a function, or you use this method here. And that's why I have all the sample here that we are using. So we create a function known as this print age 1. And anytime this function is called, this is the action we want it to carry out. The same thing here too, we have this function login user. Anytime it is called, This is the action we want to carry out there. But instead of you using this method that we have at the top here to define a function, you can actually do the same thing too by using arrow function. And that's where we have this one down here. So this one, you are using the method of function keyword. The same thing here too. You are using the method of function keyword. But down here, we are now using the method of arrow function. Why is it arrow? So it's because of what we have here. So when you are creating an arrow function, you are going to have this item here. And inside it, you are going to have this content inside the stuff. I hope you get it now. This is creating of a function. Using function here. You are not using it yet. You are just creating it. The function, anytime you,
Okay.
they are not going to do the action at that time you are creating it. Anytime you are creating the function, they are not going to carry out whatever you pass it to them. As you can see, nothing is showing on the screen here. Nothing is showing on the console log here. Because all these things you'll be expecting it to console log the login user or to console log my it. But it's not going to do any of this action. You are only defining them. You are only giving JavaScript that, okay, this thing, you'll be using it later on. So the time you want to use them, you need to call that function. So any function you want to use, you need to call it. And down here, that's the reason why I have this function here. So to call a function, what you have to do is you mention the name of the function followed by these parentheses here. So when you want to call a function, you have to start with the name of that function. Then after the name, you have this bracket. And this is what we call calling a function here. What you are doing here, you are defining it. You've not called it. So if you save this code, nothing will happen. JavaScript is not going to perform anything here until you call the function. And how do you call a function? To call it, you type the name or whatever the name of the function that you defined there. And after the name, you pass this bracket there. And once you save this here, this one now, we are now calling the function. Can you see now it's printing out the value? So where is this function coming from? So JavaScript is going to look for where
Yeah.
you define this function. And once you see where you define the function, then it's going to carry out all the operation that you have inside. So what you are doing here, we call it function definition. Everything here is known as function definition. And everything you are doing here is what we call calling our function here. So, and I said that in JavaScript, we have two categories. We have the built-in function and we have the user-defined function. So the built-in one, they are already in JavaScript. You don't need to create them. No, here now, before we can use this print age one, we have to define it up here first before we can start using it down here. But when you're talking about the built-in one, you don't need to create them. You just use them directly because they have been created already for you. And that's why they are built in. They already been built for you by JavaScript there. They already been built for the browser that you want to work with. Just call them and they are going to work. You don't need to start defining all those functions again like that. But if it is something that you are creating yourself, which is the user defined, then you have to define the function first. Then after you define the function, then the next thing you do is to call the function. So if I want to call this function now, how do I call it? This login user now. If I want to call it down here, so how do I call it? If I want to call that function, how do I call it? Just explain it
Yeah,
to
you
me.
just put hello sir.
Yes, I will just put what?
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, you just put the login user, the one and the one you use to represent it. And I want to ask a question, but that's
Yes.
how you do it.
Yeah. So now if I call it now, it's going to print it out. Yeah. So as you can see, it's carrying out the operation here. So what's the question?
Yeah. So my question is, you know that this can someone use the stuff to represent how many this thing can you use it to represent? Because if you can see this login user now, you are using it to represent two, which is login user and the username is admin.
That's what I said that it's
So
going to.
can
I
someone use
understand.
it to represent
Look at it.
multiple this thing?
Look at it here. Look at the definition. Functions are reusable block of code. This thing doesn't care the number of what you pass into it. Can be one. This is, can you see codes? This code did not say it is one code. is 2 code or is 3 code. Whatever action you want that your function to carry out, that's what you are going to give to it. This one I just sample right now, just to denote the action we want this function to carry out. So it can either be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just put whatever you want it to do, and it's going to perform everything for you. Doesn't need to be 1, or it doesn't need to be 2 or 3. It can be any statement that you want this thing to carry out. Whatever you want it to do, pass it there, and it's going to do it for you. It doesn't care whether it is 1 line, 2 line, 3 line, 1,000 line. It doesn't care. Whatever you give to it, that's what it's going to do for you. So here, this one are just sample. This is
Okay, so
later on. They are just sample to represent the action you'll be carrying out later on. If I start with the action, you will not even understand what is going. That's why I'm just using this simple stuff that we've talked about before. But that doesn't mean this is what you always have there every time. Whatever you want the function to do, that's what you pass there. And you are the one
okay,
that will give that definition. And that's what we call a function definition. You are the one that will define what the function is going to do. Whatever you give to it, that's the only thing it's going to do for you. It will not do anything outside of that. But the advantage of this thing is that you can actually do this thing again and again. The number of times you call this in, that's the number of times it's going to carry out that operation. And as you can see, this is the first time, this is the second one, and this is the third one, because you call the function 3 times. So the first one we do this like this, the second one too we do the same thing, and this third one here too will be for this third call. So the number of call that you call this your function, the same thing is going to carry out that operation for you on the browser there, like that. So if you call it once, it will do the operation once. If you call it 2 times, then it will do it 2 times, and so forth, like that. But the action you are going to be passing to it, it all depends on you. The thing is not limited to a particular number of code that you can put inside it. It all depends on what you want that your function to achieve. Is that all? Hello? Hello?
okay. Yeah, I'm with you, sir.
Okay. So this other one I will be talking about.
I'm with you, sir.
Yeah, this function with parameter, I will be talking about this one tomorrow. But again, function, they are reusable block of code. You have bunch of code that you want to reuse. But instead of you doing copy and paste for this your code, look at this thing now. Assuming we are not using function, if I want to do this thing 3 times, what I have to do is that I have to do it like this 3 times. I have to paste like this. I have to do this paste, go to next line paste, and go to next line paste. This is what these 3 lines are doing here. So instead of you doing it in this way, you now created a name. You created a name to represent this in, and that name is what you'll be calling. And anytime you call that name, JavaScript is going to perform the action that you put inside that function there. So here now, if I save this in, you see that we are having the same, we are having it 3 times. But instead of doing it like this, because this is a bad practice, I can actually use a name to represent all this action. And here too now, if I save, you see that nothing is showing. But now if I activate this function, you see that we are getting the same result. But this one is more manageable because here now, in case there is any changes, I just need to change the source. So here now, instead of it to be admin, it's just going to be this Abdul Rakib now. And like this. And if I save it, you see that I don't need to change where I'm calling the function. I only change the definition. And from there, it's going to have the changes anywhere I'm calling that function there, like that. So functions are
Okay,
a block of code that you want to do. And where are you going to be using all this in? You're going to be using it a lot later on the page, because when we get to this modifying of the content of the page, this function will come outside, because whatever you want to be using to get what is on this page, JavaScript has already created all this thing for all. The browser has already give us all this functionality. But how do you interact with them, or how do you create your own too? That's the reason why this topics is here, because you are going to be using them later on. And that's the reason why I bring out this one right now. I bring out one of them. So for example, here now, I have this alert. So this alert is given to you by JavaScript. So how does alert work? The job of the alert is that pass anything to it here, and once you save it, that's what is going to output out on the screen. that can you see what is coming out? So this is what we call alert here. But you know, we are not the one that define this alert. Our own is just to call it. And once we call it, it's carrying out the operation that we want it to do. But that operation, we are not the one that define the operation. The operation here is that anytime you call this function, it's going to bring out this model that you are seeing here. So it's going to bring out this model, and you see whatever stuff that you need to see there. But there is something I'm using here that I've not talked about, which is what I'll be talking about tomorrow there. So I'm passing something into this function here like this. So if I save it, you see that the function is going, can you see what it's doing? It's bringing out text like this. So it's bringing out the text because that's what I pass into it. But I can call this thing multiple times with different value. But what is this thing that we are calling? What is this thing that we are calling? This is what we call function here. Because anytime you call a function, you always pass this bracket here. When you're calling a function, this thing will always there. And anywhere you see something like this, just know that it is function. But what is function? That's what we have been talking about since. Like how can you create your own too? Because this one is given to us by JavaScript. But we don't want to use the one that is coming from JavaScript. We want to create our own first. So you should know how to create a function. Again, you should know how to call a function. So that when you know about all this thing, then you can now start using what the browser is giving you later on. Some of the functions that the browser is giving you are there like that. And that's how this thing works.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Hello, sir.
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello.
I can hear you.
Yeah, you bring out the one JavaScript is giving, which is you put in alerts now.
Yes.
So it's appearing up here. The text is appearing up here, not inside the console here. So why?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying now. Is whatever action that you give to your function. Look at the function that I called. What did you see there? Is it not the console that I'm using? I'm the one that define the action that the thing should be printed in the console.
No, no, I'm not talking about
What
this
to
one.
do? Yes. That has,
Okay. I
it's the
get it.
action that you give to the function, but
Okay, I
that one
just
is created by
understand.
JavaScript. You are not the one that created the stuff. So the action that JavaScript gave to it is to bring out that modal. You too later on you are
Mm.
creating your function that will bring in your own modal on the page. But you need to know how to create the function and you need to know how to work with the function. If you want to create the modal later on and you want to use the function to trigger the modal, how do you create this? That's what we are talking about, how to create a function here by using this function keyword or by using the arrow method here. But I don't want to be doing all those complex stuff right now. That's why I'm using console inside all the function here. But later on, it's not the console that will be there. It's going to be a complex stuff that is going to be inside them, which I'm going to show some of the sample here that is going to be there later on like that. So if I stop the server here and open another project that I've been using all this in, so for example like this Mayovest 23 like this, so we have a lot of things under this one. You are going to see that functions is being used in all this thing. But if you don't know about what is function, if you don't know about function, you don't know how to create a function or you don't know how to use function, how do you know how to now interact with the page later on? You can't interact with the content of the page directly like that. JavaScript or the browser is giving you some function that you can use to manipulate the content on the page. And if you don't know what is function, so how do you now interact with what is going on the page? And that's the reason I'm talking about the function right now. Forget about what is inside the function, what the action is carrying out. Forget about the action is carrying out. The major thing is for you to understand what is function, how to create a function, and how to call the function. That's what I'm explaining here. The major thing is not what is inside it. Can you see now? This is document now. Is what you are going to know about later on. But look at this right. Can you see that it's using the bracket? But what is this right? Again, to look at this display name. What
Yeah.
is it? So all this one later on you'll be using them. But if you don't understand what the function, there is no way you understand what this is doing. Can you see that the function is here? The function keyword, what I just explained not too long ago, that you can create a function using this one, or you can create it using arrow function. So all this thing is what we now be doing later on. And there's always be explaining this thing again because what you need to know about them is what I'm doing right now. So when you get to the time I will be using it in a real sense, there's no way I'll be telling you that okay, this one or this is the name of the function. It's just like I'm going back again. That's why I need to explain what is function right now. So that when you get to the time, even the console that you're using here, look at the console you're using, the log. Can you see that it's having a bracket, whatever stuff around it? This log is a function too, but it's coming from the console because you are not the one that define it. Just pass whatever you need to pass into it and it will carry out that operation. But what is the operation? The operation of the console log is to send your message into this console here. But how does it do this? Does this thing carry out all this operation? You don't need to worry yourself about that because this thing has been created for you by JavaScript. But for your own function, so what if you want to do something like this? That's what we're now talking about. That okay, how do you now create your own? How do you create your own function so that anytime you need any custom stuff, you can create a function for it, and whenever you need that say, whenever you need action, you just call your function. So the major thing you need to focus on is how to create a function. Forget about what I'm putting inside a function, whether it is one item or two items. That's not your major thing. That's not the major thing that you need to focus on. The thing that you need to focus on is how to create a function and how to call a function. Those are the only things I want you to focus on. Whatever I'm putting inside it, forget about it. It's just like when I'm explaining this thing from the CSS part, when I'm talking about the selector, I always said forget about the property because later on we are going to be talking about property. Whatever property I'm using it, don't focus on them. Focus on the selector. Here too, what you have to focus on is the function itself, how it's being defined and how it's being used. But the major thing that is inside it, forget about them. We're going to be doing all those one later on. But you need to know how to define a function and how to call a function. So that later on when I'm saying define this function, you will not be looking at what am I saying? And anytime I say, okay, call this function, you know that okay, this is what is going on there, or this is what this person is saying there. Oh, define a function age, and it needs to carry out this operation there like that. Based on this word now, and based on what we dealt with today, you already know what is going on there like that. So the major thing you need to focus on is how to create a function and how to call a function. What is inside it, forget about that one. That's not your major stuff here. And that's what I always want you to do anytime I explain anything. Don't focus much on what I'm putting inside them. The concept I'm explaining is what to be after, not the sample that I'm using, because that's not the way it's going to be every time. But the concept is the major thing. And once you grab the concept, you can use it anywhere that you need to use that particular concept there like that. So what that thing is doing is not the major thing, but the concept that that thing is trying to explain. That's what you always focus on. The concept, not the value that I'm using at that moment, because that's not when you are working with this in a real sense there. But we are using that to explain the concept. Because if you said we should just jump into where it's going to be using there, you just get lost on the way. And that's the reason why we really start from the basic, like using some of the things you've known before, like some of the things we've talked about before. And when you now get to the time that we need it, then we now bring everything together. And that's how it works. So you don't focus on one is doing console log, that one is not doing console log. That's not your major this in it. The major thing is that how do you create a function and how do you call a function? Those are the things that the thing is explaining, and those are the two major things that you need to focus your attention on, not what that thing is actually carrying out. The major thing you are after there is what is a function, how to create it, and how to call a function or how to use a function. Those are the major things that the course is all about. So this is where I will stop, and can go over the video again there like that. Let me